Greetings. In this section, we will ensure that the process of parsing the data from the database into the domain entities is done correctly. Unit tests are our friends here, and Zend Framework 2 works very well with the PHP Unit framework. To perform the tests, I will create a separate namespace just to handle them. Right now, we have the SIC directory housing the source code for the module. I will create a separate directory and a namespace just for the tests. Underneath here, I'm going to mirror more or less exactly the same directory structure I have under the main SIC directory, just with the word test at the end of it. So models, and we have post, and underneath there we have two main things that we want to test: the actual post object, how well the post object is being created, and data mapper test, how well the data is being traveling from the database into the application layer. The first challenge is getting the application off the ground without a browser access. For that, we will need a Bootstrap file. The Bootstrap file goes underneath the test directory, and it is quite involved and there's not that many interesting things going on with it. And I just used the one provided by the Zend Framework site. Open and pasting it right there. For the record, it is right in the quick start, unit testing. We have this file that I got the code from. Pasting it right in here. Now the only thing that you have to be aware of is that the manual conveniently ignores the fact that your ZF2 path, by which the autoloader finds the Zend libraries, may not be defined. Because it's not running from the Apache instance, at least here, I cannot set an environmental variable for ZF2 path. So I'm commenting out the lines that check for it, and I'm hard coding where my framework is. So this way, Zend Framework can actually find its libraries when running from the unit test interface. Following this, we need to create a configuration file so that the unit test knows where to find the test that it needs to run. That is controlled by a PHPUnit.xml file. Now this is what I have so far for that. It's a regular XML file, contains a root called PHPUnit, and the file that contains the bootstrapping of the application. So that's the bootstrap.php file that we just borrowed from the manual website. Then we have the environmental variable in case your environment supports it. Mine doesn't. Again, I'm relying on the hard-coded ZF2 path that I have in the source code. And the test suites, where they are located. I'm just giving them a name, ZF tutorial, and I'm letting it know where the test suites are. So according to this, it's going to run everything test related underneath the blog test directory. In case you haven't gotten the PHP Unit library yet, you can get it from the phpunit.de site as described in the manual. I did it using a POA, so it installed both the executable path in my binary directory for me to execute directly from the command line, as well as the overall PHP Unit library with assertions. So if I navigate to my directory here, I can run my PHP unit, and it will tell me that right now there are no tests executed. It tells me the configuration file that it's read from, the PHPUnit.xml, and it hasn't found any tests along its way, therefore only 0 things run. For convenience, I can also set up my IDE to handle the unit tests. In PHP Storm, if I can remember how to do this, it's PHP Unit, the directory where the unit tests are being executed from. At the moment, we only have a single module to test, so right here we'll do the configuration file that we want. Oh, it picked it up automatically, excellent. And the Bootstrap, it also picked up excellent, nice. It didn't work in a beta version, I think. Okay, so following that, we'll just rename this to local unit test, because if you're really serious, you also would want to run a unit test against the production environment. I'm just doing it locally. So now if I press the play button for the local unit test, I have no test run at the moment. It tells me the PHP Unit Framework that I'm running, the configuration, and whatever have I. The first thing I want to test is how well do the setters and getters in the post identity map work. You might think I'm crazy testing something so trivial, but I have learned the hard way that even trivial things as this can cause such a huge problem with simple typos or just pressing the control space and enter at their own time in IDEs or completing their own variable. But I also had a client that had very complicated setups for the domain entities. They were not just simple setting this variable equals to that parameter. It was some complicated calculations and matching of the company variables and employee data. It was very complicated. And one time I tried to refactor it, just changed one tiny thing and the whole application exploded. It took me days to put it all back together. So even something as trivial as these little setters and getters, I do highly recommend to test them. Now it does get very tedious, I do admit, so I will only show this once, and for the rest of the tutorials I will do them off screen and just show you what the overall result is expected. Creating a test file isn't quite like creating your regular model. Of course it still uses same PHP syntax, but the library layout is quite interesting. Blog test shall be our namespace. We are inside of the model's post namespace underneath that. So this way none of the code interferes with the actual blog files. For this we will be using PHP Unit, no, not that one, PHP Unit Framework test case. This is something that comes with the installation of the PHP Unit framework in PIA. At the moment my IDE complains that it's not available, probably because I haven't added it to my path. So this is also a good time to show you where it comes from. I do believe it is somewhere around this area. Specifically PHP Unit, there we go. Apply there, and now it is available. Now we are testing the blog post class, so we do have to access it, and I am letting the class know that there is a post somewhere over at the main post namespace. Okay, so now the IDE and the PHP interpreter knows where everything is. We can define the actual test class. Test case. So if you keep this kind of convention, then the PHP Unit framework will pick it up as one of the tests that it has to run, as long as that file is underneath this directory, blog test. So that's how it finds it. underneath the block test, classes with this kind of structure. Underneath that, we have a public function corresponding to every test case. Test, I want to verify that my object properties are properly set. Now, how can I possibly do that if my properties are private? Well, what I can do is reflect it. First of all, I'm going to need some sample data to test against. And this is going to be the format for just about every test case I will ever do. I will have a bunch of test data, and there is no single way of doing this. I'm just showing the basics for now, and then I can talk about the variations as complexity grows. Now I got to tell how I want to use these test values similarly to the way I would write a real application. In a real application, I would create a new post, and I would set up its ID, and I will set up its title. So, generally speaking, if all goes well, by the time this post travels into the rest of the application, the ID and the title should be the same as I have entered. But how do I verify that? I don't want to verify using the getters because I don't know whether the logic actually changes any of the values. I may have the employee's salary entered as one figure, but then I may have the salary adjusted with a bonus, hopefully, as the data is being set. So the getter will actually return something else from the original setter. So I really have to hit the private property that the setter is storing the value in. To do that, I will use PHP reflections, as I have hinted upon. First of all, I have to create the actual reflection object that will handle this, what I like to call code that reads code, using the PHP's native reflection object class and passing it the post object that I have created. So now the reflected post is a reflection of the post object I have just created. Now I need to create an instance that will be responsible for reflecting my private properties. In my case, it's title and the ID. So the ID property object comes from the reflection of the post object getting the property ID. Now I need to be able to read that property. So just for this particular moment of time, I am going to make it publicly accessible. Take note that this doesn't completely change the variable from private to public. It only allows me to access it as public for this one use case from the perspective of the ID properties. It is still being protected or private respectively. Same thing goes for the title property. Taking the reflection of the post and getting a property ID, title, that gives me an object of title property, or an object based on that property. And just as before, I'm making it accessible publicly just for the instance of our test case from the perspective of the title property object. Now here comes the fun part with the PHP unit testers. The way that we verify that the data has returned correctly is using assertions. The variety of assertions supported by the PHP unit testers are available at the manual, and you can pick whichever one is most suitable for the case here. At the moment, I want to check if the two values are equals. So assert equals looks like a good candidate. All it does is it returns true or false for whether the first parameter is equals to the second parameter. And this works because I'm extending the PHP Unit Framework test case. This assert equals and the IDE is being nice and helpful, showing me all available assertions in case I don't feel like reading the full manual from the website. And what I need here is to ensure that the ID that I am testing against equals to the ID read by the ID property object reflected from the post object. ID property and get value is how we get the value from the object reference in the property reflection. And what object are we actually getting that value from? Well, that's the post object here. In case the assertion doesn't pass, we need to let the developer know or let ourselves know what exactly went wrong. In this case, ID not properly set by post setter method. Now, actually, I'm working backwards. By the unit testing convention, I'm supposed to create tests first and then write the code to fulfill the test cases second. And I will be doing that later on, but for now I just had to get across how the data mapper works in the first place so that you know what the test cases should be testing for. Once we get past this introduction stage, I will go back towards the proper way of defining the test cases first, failing them, and then writing the code to pass them. Secondly, we need to verify that the same thing is true for the title. We want the set title to be equal to the title we have originally set. So title property object, get the value based on the post data value object. And here we have title not properly set by post setter method. Okay, so let's see how this runs. Right now we have an error. It's saying that there is an issue finding the main model abstract in the post PHP line 7. Oh nice, it actually takes me there once I click on it. Let's see what this is about. Oh yes, of course. How did I let this happen? It's the main entity abstract. Jeez. The main entity abstract. Let's make sure I haven't done the same mistake anywhere else. Okay. So that should take care of that. Let's rerun the test, see if anything else went wrong. Yes, indeed, we're failing something else. We are saying that the ID is not properly set by the post setter method. Oh, that's interesting. And that would be post. Oh, look, I made the same mistake I was talking about. I forgot to actually set the ID. Oh goodness, how did they let this happen in my previous tutorial? Well, that's what unit tests are for. Let's try this now, and now everything is passed. Now I know for sure that my post at the main entity actually works. As far as the set is at least. Now we're going to do the same thing for the getters. Test object properties get, I will call this. And just like before, the same logic applies. We may have getter values different from the setter values, so we don't want to test the output of get based on the input of the set. I'm going to forcefully define what the private properties of the object will be. Setting up my default testing values against which I will compare the assertion results. ID shall be 1 and title shall be tested title or whatever it is, as long as it comes out to be the same. Setting up test case. Post equals new post. That's the object that we are going to be testing. And I'm reflecting the post class based on the post object. Just like before, I'm getting the object that is responsible for keeping track of the private property based on the reflection of the post class. I will make it temporarily public, and I will set a value, because now again it's a public property just for this one tiny instance from a perspective of the ID property reflection object. I will give it the ID value and assign it to the instance I have just created earlier. Same thing for the title. Title property object comes from the property object from the post reflection class. Make it publicly accessible. Set the value for that property in the instance of the post object. And ready to test with the equal assertion. I will check whether the getter of the object is equals to the ID that I have forced into the object through the reflections. If something went wrong, ID not properly returned by post getter method. That sounds about right. This assert equals, same thing shall be for the title. Post get title. Title not properly returned by post getter method. Okay, I wonder how many errors I will get this time. Oh, all good. And just for the record, in case you don't want to use an IDE for this, the command line returns something like that. Right now it says that it has run 2 tests. Each test corresponds to these public functions. And the 4 assertions, that's the individual please assert something 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this verifies that our post thing works. Now we can check whether the data mapper is returned from the database the data that we expect to. Now at the moment I don't have the database connection actually set up, but we want to prepare some kind of mock test so that when we do have the database going, we're ready for it. I will just show a basic example. Where I inside a block test namespace, models, post, nothing changed there. We're using PHP Unit Framework test case, and we will be using two things from the main project. We will be using the post data mapper, and I will be using the post object, because after all I'm verifying that the data mapper is giving me the appropriate post. Now what is the problem here? Yes, of course, it's MySQL data mapper. Okay, so we're testing the MySQL data mapper specifically, and this one is very simple. All we're doing is checking whether the data mapper is capable of returning a full post object with the values that we expect. So data mapper test, or might as well be more descriptive and call this MySQL data mapper test, in case I change my mind and I want to use PostgreSQL, and I really plan to do that very soon, because there's some functions that I really want to use there that are not available in MySQL, such as native table pivoting and native object relational features. So test values id is equals to 1. Oh, apologies, forgot to put the actual method we're testing this in. Title, now we got to set up the sample test case based on that data. I will have my post data mapper equals to new MySQL data mapper, post data mapper fetch post by ID. Now at the moment this will fail because I have a constructor for MySQL data mapper looking for the ZendDB adapter instance, and once again I'm seeing a mistake. It's data mapper abstract, not the main model abstract. So just for now I'm going to comment this out. I will fix that up when I'm ready to play around with ZendDB adapter. Just want to show how the test works in the first place. I want to make sure that the post that it returns is of proper instance and has the properties set correctly. Now at the moment fetch post by ID is complaining that it's not returning the appropriate post type, so let's see what that is. Here we see the reason why I like to define the return types for these functions. That way the ID can actually help me use this. So you see now I actually have helpers letting me know what is available on the object that is returned by the fetch post by ID. I can actually get its title. So that's great. I will do this. I assert, first of all, I need to make sure that the returned object is of the correct type, and assert instance of is a very good example of such assertion utility. It needs to be models post type. We're comparing that returned object, and if something is wrong, data mapper did not return appropriate instance type. After that, I want to check that the data mapper has actually assigned the variables properly. Assert equals is once again a helpful one here. We want to make sure that the ID 1 is being properly fetched. Now at the moment, I'm doing something strange and awkward. I have the ID hard-coded in the test case, but then the MySQL data mapper is supposedly getting it from the database. That actually doesn't happen in the real world. What we will do once we get to the database table, we will have something called mock objects that are provided by the Zend Framework just exactly for this, being able to use unit tests on the Zend DB adapter. And we also want to check whether the title is being returned or not. Okay, at the moment everything should fail because I have never implemented any fetching methods for the data mapper. So we just verify that and saying yes, indeed we have issues. MySQL data mapper task get by post ID has problems. Let's just fix them up by creating some dummy data. I'll just say post equals new post, set ID, just call it 1. And now we finally see the reason why I return an instance of self for every setter. I can now chain the setters like that. Set title, and what is it that I'm setting it with? That. And now we just hard coding everything awkwardly. That's that, and everything should be good. Yep, all passed. There we go. Here is a crash course on how unit tests work with Zend Framework.